Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Transform Sales Podcast. This is the Sales Agency Growth Edition. I'm Tony Dix.
And I'm Steve Schmidt.
And our guest
And
today
I'm
is
Raj
Raj
Jha. I introduced myself. I didn't feel it coming, so I was like, I'm waiting. I'll do it myself.
Yeah, can't blame you. Can't blame you. Hey, welcome, Raj. Raj, to give you all a little bit of background on Raj. Raj is founder and CEO of Exit Scout. He's a serial entrepreneur, investor, advisor, and former corporate attorney, recovering corporate attorney, now helping businesses maximize their value, accelerate their revenue cycles, and optimize corporate structure to minimize companies' tax bills. Long and short of it is to get the highest valuation possible when they exit their businesses. Thanks for being with us today, Raj.
It's great to be here, Tony. We've had conversations before this, and I think this is an exciting topic for your audience.
Absolutely, absolutely. So one of the things that Exit Scout focuses on, just for anybody tuning in, you'll definitely hear information or get information from Raj that helps you to exit any type of business. But in particular, we're going to focus on agencies, and Raj actually specializes in agencies among other types of businesses. Raj, would you tell us a little bit about the agency that you used to run and that you sold, actually?
And that I sold, yeah. So it was a vertical agency. So as Tony talked about in my introduction, I was an attorney for a number of years. So after that, I founded an agency that worked for law firms. And I recognized that, it's a vertical agency. And I recognized that here's a space where you've got a very unsophisticated marketers, largely, who have good budgets. So I did a vertical agency in that we served as the outsourced marketing departments for these large law firms. And I ran that for about 7 years and sold it to a larger sales and marketing outsourcing company.
Awesome. Awesome. And as we were talking about, Steve actually recently exited. Steve, what are your thoughts about, you got any questions that come to mind that you say, hey, if you would have known this before you made your exit, you would have fared better, been better off?
Well, the joke is, it sounds like he had some pretty good lawyers backing him up. He was in good company. So I think that's usually, they always say that's good, but I think the thing a lot of people don't necessarily realize, or they don't wake up thinking about, is we hear a lot of the good stories, right? Acquisition. We haven't heard a lot of that lately. But what they don't hear is like the risk going into it is that a signed deal in business doesn't necessarily mean it's as such. So I'd love to, as the show goes on, kind of dive in that a little bit so people can see not just the, hey, we were acquired or merger, it's like the mechanics behind it. Because I think a lot of people who listen to this show will be taking notes, especially agency owners, because of the fact that, and this is a tip of the hat, and I'll end with this, is, a lot of agency owners, I don't talk to a lot of them who are trying to stay in the business. Most of them are trying to get out of the business because it's so hard. But when I've seen it done right operationally, it doesn't seem as hard. Surprise, surprise, right? And those are the kind of businesses that can be acquired. So I'd also love to delve into kind of the operational backbone you had in your own company that made it appealing, because obviously you're great, you're an entrepreneur, but the processes within the company were what they were acquiring in the customer base, right? Not you, the person. So walk us through that, like from an agency perspective, because a lot of times agencies are started and run by someone who can do the work, and usually the work is diluted. But if they get good processes, man, watch out, because then they're dangerous.
Yeah, I call it the accidental agency owner, right? They were doing something else that they didn't really want to do. They had a job, maybe they just left it. They wanted to start their own thing, and they start doing the work. And then they don't always get to that point where they're separating themselves from the entity. It is a business from an acquirer's perspective. It is a machine that they are buying to generate future cash. And whenever they're buying a machine, they want to know that the machine is going to work. And if you, the owner, are really just tied up in every aspect of the business, well, they can't really just purchase you with the business, right? What you want is to be able to go away with cash in hand at some point. But that's risky for them, because if you've built the entire business around yourself or around a bunch of people who don't have any defined way of doing things, that's a highly risky purchase for them. So what they're going to say is, well, why would I take that risk, right? All these people are just going to leave and there's nothing left. You've got a people-based business and there's nothing there. So they're not thinking of it like a business, and a business is a machine, and a machine has parts and processes that get to a certain result. So by waking up every day and doing the client work, instead of thinking of the business as what the product I'm really making is the business so I can sell it, they're really missing the point of what an acquirer would want. So not understanding that, not understanding what it takes to go from showing up every day and doing the client work to a sellable business, which is a product in and of itself, is what they're missing. So they end up with maybe some cash flow today, but really nothing at the end of the road.
That's interesting. The end of the road being, for some of them, a valuation based off of an exit from the business. Some of them may choose to stay on, some may not. Now, Raj, walk us through that, because I can tell you from my previous experience negotiating a deal, if I had to go back and look at the private equity deal that I did not take, I guess I was the business owner. They wanted me to stay in seat for 2 to 3 years. CEO title would be removed. CEO would now be CRO. After 2 years, I would be completely removed from the business, because they said, what you didn't do is you did a good job of inserting, like you said, yourself on the front end to drive business. But Steve, as we look to the future of how this thing could grow, you got to take yourself out of that. And right now, if we took you out of it, since that's what you're relying on is this social media presence, there is no acquisition. So we need to be able to get those processes into place. And it was obviously even too late to even really start thinking about that. So walk us through the valuation process, because that changed my perception completely of the value of the business that I was running and what it meant to me as a business owner, which at the end of the day is so much more important now to me, this question is, than it was a year and a half ago.
Yeah, I think that you really have to start thinking about the business and every function in the business as, can it stand alone? So I go through this process with the agencies that I work with, and I call it management by vacation. And you take every function of the business and you ask, if I were away for 1 week, what would happen? If I was away for 2 weeks, what would happen? A month, a quarter, a year. And if the answer is it all goes to crap, then you have a problem. Because if you can't be away from the finance function for longer than a week, there's a big problem. It means you need to have a person with a defined set of processes who can handle that function. And if you go through that management by vacation, you should be able to go and take a 1 week vacation, then go take a 1 month vacation, then go take a 3 month vacation. And now you know that you're on the road to actually setting this up. That's to be something that's transferable, because you are not necessary for the business. But you have to go through it in a really disciplined way and go through it with an understanding of how you're going to set those processes up, not just so that the business functions now, but so a new owner could come in and continue to have it function that way. Because as I talked about, they're buying certainty. The pricing is based on certainty. So the multiple you're going to get is all based on how well you do this.
Raj, I gotta, this is an unplanned question, right? But I think the audience will appreciate it. Take Elon Musk, large scale. He's got a brand. He's got a flavor about him. He also has a company. He has a few of them. Mm-hmm. Tesla has processes. They have that. And then they have Elon Musk, who gets up and sometimes will smoke a joint on a show with Joe Rogan. Sometimes he'll do this. But at the end of the day, Tesla, however it's performing in the stock market, has value due to its processes. A lot of these agency owners now in this era of self-promotion, if you will, because it is a good channel of acquisition, like what would you recommend to them in terms of like, hey, like build the brand itself, although you might be the loudest voice, be careful of how much you put yourself out there, because that is the value of the company and you can't be replaced.
I think that there's a truth to that in agencies, which is different from Elon Musk. So if you look at, he's got a bunch of companies, right? He's got Tesla and The Boring Company and now Twitter and there's a bunch of things. Yeah. SpaceX, right? And he's got Neuralink and he's got a whole mess of companies that he is running or has had installed people to run. Mm-hmm. There's one difference. None of those are service businesses. So he is using his personal brand, and it's either to the benefit or the detriment, depending on who you ask, of those companies. Now, when you're doing that for an agency, it still can work so long as the personality is not completely conflated with the brand, right? So when I was separating from my agency, I didn't have an earnout per se. What I did do is I did continuing media appearances for 6 months. And what we did even beforehand was launch things like a podcast in which I was introducing other members of the team so that it was a shared personalities, so that when someone came to the Practice Alchemy site, they would see me, they would see Jeannie, they would see Ross, they would see a bunch of other people, and they get familiar with all of these characters as you can think about it. So instead of tying it all up in your personal brand, you make it a brand about people and about culture and about results. So you can do it if you're doing it intentionally. So I wouldn't say don't do personal brand. I think personal brand can definitely help you grow. So you don't want to sacrifice that growth. But again, you have to do it very intentionally and saying, okay, what's a buyer going to think about this? Because otherwise you'll be, as you said, stuck in the earnout for multiple years, 2 to 3 years, in which you have to be in that chair or else you don't get your full payout. So you wouldn't want to be in that situation. So think of it as you can have a personal brand, but the agency itself has to have its own brand, and that brand has to be something more than you.
Awesome. Awesome. Question. How about the valuation, the actual numbers, right? There's a lot of different assumptions about how that number gets landed upon by an acquirer. What can you tell us about how we should really approach that math?
The number is going to be based on a couple of things. First, you're going to take the EBITDA, so the true profit of the business, and they're going to handicap that based on what they see. So there's an old rule of thumb in the agency acquisition space. That's the 2 and 20s rule, which is different from the 2 and 20 of VCs. It's the 2 and the 20s rule. So that is $2 million in EBITDA, 20% margin, 20% growth year over year, and no more than 20% concentration in any one client. If you meet those rules, then that was considered a good candidate for acquisition. Now, that's not to say if you're smaller than that, you can't get acquired. You just have to be way better at all of your systems and processes in order to do that. So that's like an average agency type of acquisition. So what we have now in this market, though, is unless you are really, really tight on your systems and processes, unless you've defined uniquely what some of those things are and how they will continue to run, and unless you really understand the M&A landscape of what people are looking for, what the kinds of acquirers might want to acquire your agency, what they're looking for, how you fit in. If you haven't done that kind of diligence, you don't really know what you're building, right? Because as I said earlier, the agency, the company is a product. And if you want to sell your product, you have to know what the buyer wants. And otherwise, you're just growing for growth's sake. You're just like, oh, if I only can get to X million dollars of revenue. It's not about that. It is about what is the product that you are trying to sell as a business, as a product.
Tony, I feel like he's talking right to me, man. That last one hit me square in the chest. I don't know about you, but I was just like, man, it's not about growth just to grow. That's a lot of work, man, just to grow. Right? Just
yeah,
to grow.
It is. But like, the interesting thing about the multiple, so we went into this earlier about multiples, right? So it is easier to double the value of your agency by doubling the multiple than it is by doubling revenue. Doubling revenue is hard, right? It is. It can doubling revenue. You know, if you're nailing it, you can do that in a couple of years, right? Maybe 18 months, 2 years of really being on point on nailing the revenue, but with the process changes, you can have the exact same revenue that you do today. And if you build with systems and processes and productize as much as possible the output of your agency, you can actually more than double the valuation of your agency in a year. So this is about thinking about it in a very smart way instead of slogging it out, just hoping that next year I'll be able to do 30% more revenue. It was a down year. The overall economy is bad. Well, those things don't affect you if you're working internally on your operations and your systems and processes, and you will actually net more on your sale by having concentrated on that rather than putting all your focus on just client work and generating more clients.
So when you're speaking on that multiple, Raj, and you're talking about the processes and systems, is the big idea there really about the company being able to run without you type of processes and systems? Is that the context? Versus just being flowchart maniac.
There are multiple layers of that, and that's a good distinction, Tony. So one piece is the company running without you, and that is table stakes. You have to do that if you want to walk away with a check. Otherwise, you're going to be in an earnout situation. The second is what will increase the value of the business itself, even without you. And the more that you can make that, you can productize what you do. And that doesn't mean, for anyone who's got an agency that's got a creative component, that doesn't mean being uncreative. What it means is the more that you can make it like a product, like, think of it as if you were doing a software company, and you have to define what comes in and what comes out as a process, right? They're hiring their agency for a result. So how can you make this into a machine where client comes in and it gets that result? And that's all that it does. So when you start thinking about it that way, you start thinking about defining and productizing, how do I take in a prospective client? What's the indoctrination, if you will, into my world of how we do things? And how do we deliver that so that the results are reliable? Because that is the certainty that we talked about, right? That the buyer of your agency, they want certainty. They're giving money today for future cash flows. And the more certain those cash flows are, the more your valuation is going to go up. So you get that certainty by productizing systems and processes, by productizing your services business.
Okay, and then here from my notes, I've got that the other two items that affect that multiple. So we're talking about the valuation, right? So the numbers end up being EBITDA, and then there's this range of multiples that you can get on that EBITDA. We talked about processes and systems. I also have here the other pieces around customer churn and owner involvement. Those are those factors that one can think about if they are trying to think about their agency valuation. Would be the benchmarks would be 2 million EBITDA, 20% margin, 20% year-over-year growth, 20% maximum concentration of clients, basically no clients responsible for more than 20% of your revenue. And then you've got your multiples, which will be based on process, systems, customer churn, owner involvement. Did I state that correctly?
Yeah. Yes. And the other piece that we touched on briefly is making sure that you understand who the buyer is going to be, because different kinds of buyers might want different things. So we talked earlier about selling to a SaaS company, which is somewhat unusual. But that kind of buyer might want something different than if it's a private equity buyer, and that would want something different if it was a strategic buyer who was just buying because, for instance, I had a vertical agency in the legal space and they had nothing in professional services. So they were buying to round out a gap in their offerings. So understanding how you fit in to that backs into all of those other things about how do you actually implement it.
I got to ask the question about Mike. Have you heard of the website or the site acquire.com? I believe now it used to be called Micro Acquire.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Is that a place where you see, and I'm just saying how about this? A place like that where maybe agency owners are flocking to, or is it a good idea, bad idea? Is it just another marketplace for people to go to, or is it a distraction for someone who's building a business to even really go in there and see what's going on?
Those are mostly product. As far as I know, I have not been there in probably 6 months, but yeah. As far as I know, these are all product companies, so software and product companies. By and large, it can be an interesting exercise, but I think the better thing is to talk with people who've actually done this. Yeah. And have a view of the marketplace, because going to an online marketplace is I would say a nice distraction for spending some time, but are you really truly going to know because service businesses aren't being sold there. So are you going to truly know what you have to do, what's actionable in order to take you from the current state of your business to what the acquisition ready state of the business will be? My guess is you won't learn terribly much from that.
So speaking of this, one of the cool tools that Raj has is called CEO Workbench at ceoworkbench.com. Tons of free resources that you could use to get into more detail about how to set your company or agency up for acquisition success. And he touches on things like these different types of acquirers, identifying what types of things you need to work on. And in fact, you know what? You mentioned different types of acquirers a few times, Raj. Can we speak to that a little bit, just about just what types are they, and especially what revenue ranges they line up to? If I'm doing between $1 million and $5 million a year, what kind of investor maybe should I consider pursuing or preparing my practice for, my agency for?
Yeah, and so these are very general ranges. So each circumstance is a little bit different, but as a rule of thumb, if you're under $1 million in revenue, you're probably looking for an individual to an individual buyer. Because you're just too small for institutional capital to be interested at all. So you're looking for someone to take over the business at sub 1 million. Once you're in the 1 to 5 million zone, then you're either looking for a specialty acquisition firm, which is a firm that can come in and they kind of will run the company. So they're a platform company that will typically buy these up and then install their existing management into there and continue to run the company. Or you could sell to a strategic buyer. In the $5 to $10 million, now you kind of get to what's called lower middle market, in which there might be some private equity firms playing around. But well, I would say last year there were. This year it's a little tighter. But again, strategic buyers always on the table, specialty acquisition firms. But now we're out of the range of your individual buyers. And then 10 and up, now you're starting to talk. It's private equity and strategic buyers, and $10 million and up. And knowing that you are going to be bought by a strategic versus private equity and what you're building for is going to make a difference in how you position the agency, and not just position for sales, position in the marketplace. Because how you're perceived in the marketplace is not just for your customers, it's for your potential buyers, because they've got their corporate development people out there looking around for who could we buy. So when you position yourself right in the marketplace, you're setting yourself up to market not just to clients, but market to your buyer. And that's probably even more important in my view, because your biggest financial event is going to be the sale of the business. It is not going to be the cash flow from the business today. And I think a lot of people miss that.
Wow. Tell us then, let's go ahead and wrap this thing up with, how can an agency owner diagnose their current situation so that they could start fixing and tweaking their business in a way that they could sell it off to the type of investor that they'd like to, or acquirer that they'd like to attract?
Well, it's a deep topic. I'll first give the shameless plug, but it's free, so it doesn't matter. That all the stuff I put on CEO Workbench is you can go there, you can get it's completely free, and I've got a whole bunch of trainings. These are trainings that I've done over the years. I used to charge over $18,000 for these trainings, and I'm just giving it out there. I don't sell courses. I don't have any interest in doing that, but I want to share that knowledge. So I've also got a calculator, which it's called the Exit Scorecard, where you can go in there and you can it'll ask you a series of questions, including some of the ones that you've heard today about management by vacation, like how long could you go until this? And then it's going to give you back a series of dials, which will show you what to work on in various areas of your business. And it's the first pass diagnostic you need to know, right? The first thing you need to do is figure out what the problem areas are. And then you say, okay, now I need to put into place a plan to address those. So I would start there, frankly, because I developed that tool, that calculator, so that it could shortcut all of this confusion and spending all this time trying to figure out, well, what should I do? That's the first step that I would do.
I want to go ahead and rattle some of these off so then I can get Steve's reaction to it, right? Because he's oftentimes reflecting on his build up and exit. So Raj identified 6 categories of information. First one being evaluate your performance. And you can do all this on a scale of 1 to 6, with 6 being the best and 1 being the lowest. So performance, how well is the functional aspect of your business performing right now? Question number 2, staff, or evaluation point number 2, staff. How well is non-owner staff performing in this aspect of the business? Third, evaluate systems. How well documented is every step, manuals, templates, training for that particular function? Fourth, independence. If you vanish for 90 days, how well would this be working when you return this function? 5, relationships. If you vanish for 90 days, how would this impact customer relationships? And 6, acquisition score. How well this business unit is ready for acquisition on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the best. You're guessing at that. So the functions, obviously, that we all think about, right? We think about our product, our marketing, our sales, our delivery, our customer success, finance, other general and administrative expenses. But those 6 categories are the ones that you would evaluate each of those functions of the business by to get a general feel for where you're strong, where you're weak, and then you can kind of create an action plan on that. What do you think about that, Steve? Did any of those jump out at you as some that you thought about, but some that you may not have?
Raj, where were you about a year and a half ago? I'm pretty sure, I was not in one of your outbound cadences or sequences or anything like that. But here's the deal. Even if I was in the mode where even if you would, I wouldn't have heard it, right? Because I had, it's easier for me to admit it now, is I was in a race to nowhere, right? And there was days where I said, man, I don't like this agency work. And what really, it wasn't, I have to be careful with what I say. I think it's also important to know when you hear more business coming, the first response should not be time to hire more people, time to scale up. I would ask yourself, is that what you want to do? Because one person, very lean businesses, especially with AI happening now, and again, that wasn't really where it is at all a year and a half ago. I feel like there is an immense amount of information out there, whether it's Google or ChatGPT or this podcast episode here. But going through it, like you said, talking to an expert to prepare you for that, maybe you find out, you know what, I don't want to do this. I don't want to sell my business, or at least not right now. I love doing the work. That's what I found out, right? I'm 45 years old. It's the work I love right now. If the money follows, great. But I know that chasing an acquisition doesn't fill my cup. But I know that also I'm 45. So I need to build a business that's scalable so it can last well beyond the existence of me if I want to do anything except for just go until I'm so tired I can't work anymore. So I think for me, the big takeaway is I wish I would have known you a year and a half ago. And I guarantee there's probably at least a couple of people out there who are thinking, I need to talk to him now because it's a volatile economy. Service businesses are hard. They are also beautiful. And I'm glad that's the focus because I feel like part of Tony and I's intent with this was to really not only talk to services-based business, but to agencies, because we just couldn't find a lot of good podcasts at all or any micro content about sales agencies. A lot of marketing agencies, not a lot on the sales agency side. So that's my thoughts. And Raj, man, it was great having you here. Tony, great call when you said this guy's going to be fired. He lit it up, Raj.
Yeah, and Raj didn't let me down. I talked him up and he didn't let me down. He came through and delivered. So this won't be the last one, right? This is going to be part 1 because there are some other pieces that are very worthwhile to dive a little bit into for the good of all these agency owners, sales agency owners out there. So this is part 1 of here's why no one will buy your agency. Stay tuned for part 2. There's more goodness to come. And remember to log on to CEO Workbench and get access to all those good free resources and trainings that are available to you so that you can take your business valuation, your agency valuation to the next level. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.